When I was deciding whether or not to buy a Biorower, I couldn't find any reviews that weren't posted on their channel. So I decided to make the review that I wish I had when I was deciding whether or not to buy one of these. So I hate normal ergs. I rode as a junior, and those machines are part of why I stopped rowing. And I stopped for 10 years, and it's just in the last year that I have started rowing again. So there's a couple issues with normal ergs that any rower knows. One, they fuck up your back. Two, the movement on an erg isn't quite the same as rowing on the water, so it's not enjoyable. You don't get the same just simple enjoyment of the movement that you get when you're rowing on the water. And the last thing is that ergs reward shitty technique. You can do all sorts of bullshit and it will make you faster, which you then take from the erg, because that's where you're spending a lot of your training, and you take that technique and you bring it on the water and it makes you slow. And so you're practicing shit technique on land, and then you bring that over. Ideally, what you do on land and what you do in the boat should match, so that you're not rewarding something that's bad for you whenever you're doing land training. Now, dynamic ergs are a step up. I've rode most of them. I've rode the C2 on slides, I've rode the C2 dynamic, the RP3, the newest model, and the RP3 is the best of those, and it's definitely an improvement. Right? It's definitely a big step up from just a static erg. They do feel a little closer to being in a boat, and they don't reward shitty technique quite as much, but I'd say they're still not enjoyable to row, and I'd still say they're not really a one-to-one thing. You still know that you are erging, not rowing, and I think that's an important distinction. So that's the thing. They are an erg, not a rowing simulator, and that's what I think the difference about this thing, this Biorower is that it's not an erg, it's an actual rowing simulator. So as you'll see in a second, I'm a pretty big fan of this thing. It's not perfect, and I'll front load actually the biggest challenge of all, and probably why you haven't rode one before and why you haven't already bought one, is it's expensive. There's no getting around the price. So what is it actually like though? First, it feels like a boat. No, it's not perfect. No, it's not a 100% exactly the same as being in the boat. There's a couple things that aren't exactly the same. For instance, the connection to the catch isn't quite the same, although it's much better than other machines. But for instance, the way it moves underneath you, the general feel of it, you feel like you're actually rowing. It's not, again, it's not perfect, but it's pretty uncanny. The first time you row it, you're like, oh shit, okay. And because of that, because it's so similar to actual rowing on the water, it's enjoyable to row. Like I find the movement of rowing, the actual muscular movement of rowing, I find it, I think it's enjoyable to row. The same way as if you kick a football or a soccer ball, if you will, in the States, and you get a really good connection. It just feels good. It's the same way with rowing, which obviously, if you're a rower, you know that feeling on the water. And now you don't get the same rush of the water underneath the boat, obviously, but the same sort of muscular enjoyment that you get out of rowing on the water, I feel like I get on this, which is important to me. And then an important thing is it punishes bad technique. You can't game your splits on this the same way. If you do dumb shit, your splits will drop. If you raise your hands too much to catch, you'll notice that the connection is much weaker, just like it would be in a boat. If you dug too much, you're gonna get a weak connection. If you pull hard with one arm but not on the other, then you're gonna feel it weaker here and your splits are gonna suffer. If you throw your body around, it's gonna move around weird. It really punishes bad technique, because just like in a boat, you can't do dumb stuff and expect it to work. And this is actually really important for me in particular, because I live 2 hours from where I can get good water. The river where I am is for sailing, it's not really for rowing. And so this is extra important for me because I can work on technique on the Biorower, and then that carries over to the boat, and vice versa. If I'm working on something in the boat, I can then bring that back to the Biorower, and all of my training works like that, where again, like I can I can actually row well here, and then when I get in the boat after not being in a boat for 2 weeks, for instance, it's as if I had spent those 2 weeks on the water almost. And something that's especially important for masters rowers is it's not going to fuck your back. I mean, you see guys and ladies who are 70 years old out on the water rowing, and why can they do that? Well, because the rowing movement is really good for you. But rowing on the erg would destroy that same person and leave them with back problems. So in the same way rowing on the water is good for you, if you're a master's rower and you need to do land training, this is also good for you and it's not going to destroy your back. All right, now for a couple common questions that I've gotten about the machine. The first is, should I get the club or the pro? Now, I tried both before deciding, and while the team at Biorower might not be so happy about me saying this, I think the club is really not worth the money. It's a night and day difference between the two machines. It's not just the instability that you have with this machine. I'm not really sure what it is, but the club feels closer to an RP3 or a dynamic erg than it does to feeling like you're rowing on the water. The way it moves underneath you, etc. It's not quite there. So I'd say if you're considering the club, you're better off getting a dynamic erg and saving the money. But if you want an actual feeling like you're rowing on the water experience, then you get the pro. And it's not just the imbalance. Again, I'm not really sure what it is that's different about them, but I'm glad I was able to try both because it wasn't really clear from the site that they were that different. If all you're doing is research and you care about the accuracy of the sensors that you have here for that sort of data, then perhaps it makes sense. But if it's for your own personal training or training for your team, then I don't think there's really any decision to be made. You get the pro or don't bother. Next question is, how heavy is it? Well, it's heavy as shit. You need 2 grown men to set this up and to put it wherever you need it. And then once it's set up, you don't move it. This isn't like a C2 where you row and then you pick it up and you put it up against the wall and it takes up very little space. No, this is a big machine. It takes up a lot of space. I mean, the span that you have here is the exact same span as you have in a single. So it's just a wide machine. It's shorter than a C2 on slides, that's for sure. In fact, I think it's only a little bit longer than a C2, maybe add an extra half yard or whatnot. But because of the span, it's a big, heavy machine. You put it where it goes and you don't move it. Is it loud? It's the same as any other erg. It's about the same level of noise as you get off a C2. So how do the splits on this compare to a standard C2 erg? Well, I'd say in general they are slower. They're not directly comparable because, again, C2 is using an algorithm to calculate the splits. B, you can game the system a lot by throwing your body around, by pulling higher, by doing dumb shit. So that's not really possible on this. So there's actually a sensor. This is what this cable is here. And the sensor comes underneath, and there's a piece of metal in here, and it's literally measuring the amount of bending in the metal to decide how many watts you're pulling. So there's no, let's calculate how fast the flywheel is flying and that's it. No, it's really direct signal of very accurate data. That said, it's not really comparable between the two. You're not going to do something in the C2 and come on this and have them be the same. But I would expect that your splits would be more similar here on the Biorower to what you're going to see on the water. And I've spoken to Olympians who have tried this, and they shared the same idea, is that the splits that they see here are closer to what they see, or quite close to what they see in the water. And that's speaking to someone who's in a double, right? So I think if you're in a single or double, this is going to be very close to your splits. I haven't rowed an 8 in a very long time, so I'm not sure there. But not really terribly comparable and probably slower than what you're used to. How's the assembly? It's fine. I mean, it comes in a couple major pieces. Like for instance, this comes out, this you have to put in. This entire base thing goes on top of these rails. It takes about 30 minutes and you gotta be pretty careful watching a couple of videos, but it's not rocket science. Again, once it's set up, it's very well built. So it's just the process of getting it set up, but it's not too bad. I was asked, how are the handles? Well, as you might be able to see, I have blue croakers installed. And while I'm not sure it's possible for all handles, these are the ones I row in the boat, and I asked them if they could install these, and They went ahead and actually sanded this down a little extra so that it could fit, because these are 29 mils and it was set standard to 30 mil. And they installed these, bought the grips, installed them, and then sent it to me like this. Again, I don't know if that's possible for every grip, but you can probably have what you're used to rowing in the boat on this. And if you don't want to bother with that, the standard grips they send it with, which are what I initially tried it with, are some, they're good. They're reminiscent of like the old school rubber grips that you got on sculling blades long before. How's it for sweeping? I have no idea. I have never changed it from the sculling setup to sweeping. I have the arm for it in the corner, but I don't do any sweeping, so I haven't bothered testing it. Then how's the imbalance? It's good. It definitely adds to the immersion. On the back here, and I'll show this in the video, you have two different springs that you can tighten or loosen to change how wobbly it is, and you can actually even take the swings out, and you could really have it just, you know, move around. It's nice. It adds to it. Like in a boat, you get more imbalance at the catch than you do in the middle of the stroke. You don't get that here, fortunately, because again, you don't have the same imbalance of the oars. But as far as the difference between this and the club, that wouldn't be the deciding factor for me. It's sort of more of the feel that is better in this that makes it better than the club. How is the build quality? Well, the build quality on this is insane. It's all mostly custom milled metal pieces. Almost everything on this is custom. They make pretty much everything in-house in Austria. And despite the price of this machine, I reckon their profit margins are probably lower than C2 profit margins. So just to give you an idea, like this is a beast of a machine, and there's a reason why it's so expensive. It's not just because it's better. It's that there is a lot going on here that they've had to invest to make it like it is. And then what's with all of this wood that I have underneath it? It needs to be flat. I have an old house and my floors aren't level. And if it's not level, then how it moves underneath you isn't going to be correct. And so I've had to use wood to basically get the floor to be level so that everything moves correctly. If your floors are level, you won't need that. And then lastly, the support is excellent as you'd expect with a premium product like this. I have spoken directly to Armin on a number of occasions. I spoke to some of the other people on his team because I needed to swap out one of the eye bolts. As you'd expect, support is good. It's an expensive machine. That's what you would hope. So what's the final verdict? Well, there's not really any comparing this with normal ergs. Again, this is a simulator, and it's very enjoyable to row. It's not going to screw up your back. I love it. This is a big part of how I've actually been able to get back into rowing, because I would just refuse to get on a linear erg. And for masters rowers, I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly if you're concerned about injury. And for collegiate programs or international programs, I think you should have at least one of these, because you can do a lot to correct technique on land, make adjustments to someone better than you can on the water. And for training during winter, if you can't go on the water, have your athletes rotating through normal ergs and this so that they're keeping their technique in a good place. Again, the main challenge is just cost. So for people who have the means to get one of these, is it perfect? No, but I think it's head and shoulders above everything else, and I think it's a no-brainer if you can afford it.